During the Second World War and its ensuing aftermath, film adaptations of hard-boiled American crime fiction became a widespread artistic movement in Hollywood. French film critics dubbed the films that sprouted from this trend black films or film noir, due in part to their shared pessimistic tone that reflected the uncertain and anxious sentiments of the post-war era. In crafting these works of art, directors such as Orson Welles and John Huston explored the themes of fatalism, the belief that all events in life are predetermined, societal corruption, and the follies of human nature. As the post-war era drew to a close with the end of the 1950s, this instantly recognizable genre of film gave birth to a new movement that has become a cornerstone of the modern-day film industry. The era of Neo-Noir began in the 60s and 70s, when the threat of utter destruction from the Cold War was most palpable, and when distrust in the government became prevalent with the uncovering of the Watergate scandal. The pessimistic sensibilities toward these issues were translated into films such as The French Connection, All the President's Men, and Taxi Driver.
Look at the size of that. Oh, yeah.
Upon initial viewings of films from the neo-noir and noir genres, you would assume the key difference that distinguishes the two is that one is shot in color and the other is not. You would be forgiven for drawing up such a conclusion, but you'd be wrong. Chinatown, released in 1974 and written by Robert Towne, has all the markings of a classic noir. The alluring femme fatale, the good-natured anti-hero detective, and the grand spanning mystery entrenched in a corrupt public institution reeking with crime.
Get it, Jake, it's Chinatown.
In truth, the conventions of the neo-noir genre are loosely defined, only being identified by the subversion of its predecessors' tropes. In Seven, directed by David Fincher, the antagonist identified anonymously as John Doe is a more twisted version of the classic noir antagonist archetype, that his motivations are not fueled by money, sex, or revenge. Instead, it is more ambiguously stated as being the need to satiate his savior complex by quote-unquote liberating humanity from sin through his works, a series of gruesome murders that correlate with each of the 7 deadly sins, intended to horrify society into re-evaluating its social values. None of this violence could not be shown during the era of classic noir. This was due to the restrictions of the self-imposed Hays Code, which lasted from 1934 to 1968. As a result of the code's restrictions, classic noir films were prohibited from showing any graphic violence or nudity, sexual imagery, or profanity.
Hey, what are you doing? Close crime scene. Get the fuck out of here.
To work past these creative roadblocks without sacrificing artistic vision, directors were forced to merely allude to mature content through dialogue or neutered imagery. This was why in The Third Man, the corpse recovered from Harry Lime's grave was not shown on camera, and why in Casablanca, the most the audience got to see of Rick Blaine and Ilse Lund's sexual affair in Paris were passionate kisses. Today, there is nudity and violence galore throughout neo-noir films that enhance the story as well as the genre's pessimistic attitudes, Seven being an excellent example.
It seems that envy is my sin.
And the Coen brothers' No Country for Old Men. Hitman Anton Chigurh's brutality is shown in full force in gruesome shots where he chokes an officer to death and guns down unsuspecting cartel members on his mission to retrieve the stolen MacGuffin of the film. As a result of his uncensored violence, scenes like this
What's the most you ever lost on a coin toss?
Sir?
The most you ever lost on a coin toss.
are so tense, because the audience knows the poor old man is one flip of a coin away from an inhumane death. The only instance in which a neo-noir is pressured into doubling back on the graphic imagery is when it could impede on a director's creative vision. Rian Johnson's brilliantly written Knives Out movies, for instance, are intentionally comedically directed, with very little violence and sex being shown to ensure that there is still a crime to be solved in the story. Prisoners, starring Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal, seldom show any graphic imagery pertaining to the child trafficking that is at the forefront of the film's conflict, forcing the audience to dreadfully imagine for themselves what twisted predicaments Keller and Franklin's kidnapped children are facing. Neo-noir also receives the distinction of being able to be fused with other film genres. Take the Blade Runner films, for instance. Ridley Scott's 1982 Blade Runner and Dan Villeneuve's 2017 Blade Runner 2049 are an intriguing fusion of noir and sci-fi that gave rise to the popularity of the cyberpunk genre, which inspired subsequent sci-fi noir works such as Cowboy Bebop. Explosive action thrillers such as The Matrix and John Wick films have traces of noir, as in both our heroes are forced to fight an all-dominating corrupt system that was spawned by human folly. In 2008, mainstream audiences and comic book fans alike bore witness to Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, a gripping and tragic tale that reflects on the post-9/11 America that dehumanized the incarcerated, prioritized mass surveillance over privacy, and blindly trusted flawed institutions in the hopes of preventing another terrorist attack. 2019's Joker is a character dissection of a mentally ill and mentally tortured victim of ineffective medical institutions and a society that overlooks men's mental health. Matt Reeves' The Batman, through the perspective of Robert Pattinson's portrayal of the Caped Crusader, shows a Gotham City suffering from citywide corruption brought on by powerful public figures withholding sinister agendas. Across each of these films, there is a thematic through line of class division, how the rich and powerful exploit the financially vulnerable, and the dangers of unmitigated revolutions. Neo-Noir is still prevalent in the contemporary Hollywood landscape and in the minds of millions, having persisted for nearly 6 decades since its predecessor's inception in the 40s. With recent tragedies such as the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, people as divisive as ever in all facets of life, and mistrust in the government and authority arguably at its most extreme, there are still stories to be told in this genre that can continue its time-old tradition of indulging in our gravest flaws, our worst impulses, our darkest selves.
You got no cause to hurt me.
No. But I gave my word.
Everything that's ever happened to you has led you here. Fate.
That's a shit deal.
All those moments will be lost in time.